just been 15 years away from the world and stuffed a microphone in his face. How was it? You just won the lottery. I mean, it was just sort of such an inappropriate and inelegant moment that I thought he doesn't owe us any explanation. He's already given his time. He gave us all something very deep, whether you like him or not. There's no going back on him. He traded 15 years of his life for the action of protecting whistleblowers.
Yes.
He doesn't need to tell you anything. You don't have anything you need to ask him. And whatever he's going to do next, I think the public should wonder, and I think it should be up to him. So it was a big fight within my creative team because I was adamant to go all the way there and not ask him anything. And I'm quite happy that we did it that way.
We went all the way just to the shot.
Well, the shot's incredible.
It is. It is.
It looks like Walt Whitman, you know? Song of myself.
When he was released in June...
To be fair, he's got PTSD also. Like this guy he had a stroke in jail. So the idea of sort of asking him prurient questions, this whole fucking society is too prurient. I don't think we should be trafficking in the prurient all the time. Things need elegance or we're dead on arrival. So if a guy can't come out of jail and have you respect that and the actual pain of that, not the Instagram, Facebook post pain of that, but like the real pain. It just, anyway, so.
I think it's a really smart and quite beautiful choice, especially when so much of the film takes place in this surveillance, that sense of cloistered discomfort that we see in the Ecuadorian embassy. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of this footage that you had access to,
Sure.
both the surveillance footage and the personal footage of him from within?
Yeah.
And how that also changed your perspective coming into the film over those years?
Well, you know, our lives are all so surveilled now. So when we first saw that footage, the surveillance footage, there's something in common there with when we first saw collateral murder. When I first saw collateral murder, my stomach turned. Israel has managed to do collateral murder every hour for years now in Gaza. So the public is totally inured to that. It doesn't mean we don't watch that murder and feel shocked by it. But our standards are plummeting. When that collateral murder footage came out, it rocked the world. We now live stream genocide. I'm sorry for anybody who's offended by that. As a Holocaust Jew, we live stream genocide. That's my prerogative to say. And that happened on the time frame of the film. When we started the film, collateral murder was the most shocking thing I'd ever seen. By the time we were done, I would ask members of my team, is it really impactful still? As if I was asking whether like a TV show was entertaining. It's gotten that callous. So the collateral murder footage seemed shocking at the time and became more standard to our consuming eye over time. And the same is true of the surveillance footage, because surveillance has become such a way of life for us. We are so living under the watchful eye of Big Brother that we wondered over time, will the feeling of 24/7 surveillance in the embassy, will it hit people the way that it should? Or will people say, well, come on, I mean, there's cameras in my office, there's cameras in the train station, there's cameras in every grocery store, we're being facial recognition everywhere we go. And I hope that no one feels that. But there was a time where we thought, is it clear enough to the viewer that not only is his every move being watched, but it's being uploaded to Washington so that he cannot have attorney-client privilege? These people are talking about putting him in jail for 175 years, and he would not have attorney-client privilege because they've been listening decidedly to all his lawyer and doctor meetings. When we understood that we had that, I believe the U.S. got frightened, because then the U.S. was going to have a national security case with 175 years against someone they had confirmed was a publisher. Obama had already accepted with the New York Times problem that he was a publisher. And so you were now going to be not only trying to put a publisher in jail, you were doing so at the expense of his attorney-client privilege. When we figured out that way of marshaling that information, I think it accelerated the U.S. process toward resolution.
So you were involved in in this process from when he was in the embassy and in Belmarsh.
Yes.
Were you or your team surveilled? Were you cautious about that? I mean, there are other filmmakers who've become, I guess, targets of U.S. surveillance or certainly of interest. Did you have concerns about that? Did you take precautions? How did you sort of face that potential reality?
We were surveilled. Assange's lawyers experienced a bunch of trespasses, including that the office of Aitor Martinez, the lawyer in the film, was broken into. We have footage of the break-in of his office. We ourselves protected ourselves as much as possible by creating a kind of an air-gapped entire computer network that we worked on. And one of the hardest things about making the film is we could not show the film to anybody. I couldn't travel with it. I couldn't share it with people. So like raising money for it or showing it to people to get them encouraged or like explaining to my mom why between the ages of 87 and 92 in her life, I was not going to be around a lot because we were in Germany. It was heartbreaking for me. And she loves this kind of topic. My mother cares a lot about all of us. And so the idea of not being able to show her, Mom, I'm doing good. It's something, it's important. It was all difficult and very sequestered. But it kept us from some degree of surveillance, but a certain degree occurred anyway, particularly after I went to Moscow to be with Stone.
So I have to ask about the unbelievably compelling interview with the person from UC Global, which takes place in that, as you said, you wouldn't believe it if it was in a movie. The Sheldon Adelson connection and the Venetian and Pompeo and the CIA, which El País broke, I think, initially in 2019. But there's more stuff in your film than I think I had ever recalled seeing. Can you talk a little bit about the process of getting that person to the camera?
So the whistleblower is a witness in an ongoing legal case in Spain, which is why his identity is concealed, because his willingness to step forward to anybody had to be approved by the Spanish court, and they set rules for how we could or not include, could include or not include any of his material. The footage that is in the film, such surveillance footage as is in the Spanish case, had to be determined judicially what we could show and what we couldn't show, what we had to blur. That was a real job to be able to navigate, because you don't get quick answers out of the Spanish courts, and you're also dealing with your own ethical obligation, because it could be used against, let's say you have a case somewhere, and one of the people in the case talks to a movie maker. Well, if I'm the lawyer for the other side, I'm going to say, these guys are out there talking to movie makers. They're trying to bias the case. You could easily pursue kind of a mistrial. You could easily get stuff dismissed. So we had to navigate extremely carefully to enable him to tell us what he wanted to tell us. And it was interesting because he stepped forward for a very funny reason, which is that when the case of extortion hit the Spanish press, that a bunch of dum-dums had tried to get some money out of Assange and let themselves get filmed by a cell phone and then got stuck in a sting operation, it was kind of a joke in Spain. But when that joke in Spain happened, David Morales, nobody asked him to do this. He stepped forward and started giving interviews saying, by the way, my company had nothing to do with this. Well, no one asked you. How did you even get mentioned in this concept? And the one person who noticed what an idiotic move that was the whistleblower, who thought this guy's trying to whitewash what we did. And it compelled him to step forward, because by that point he saw that Julian was stuck in jail. He felt bad about what he had done to further that. And now he was watching somebody whitewash that. That could have become highly visible for that person were we not careful. So we spent a fortune in time, money, energy, and just caution on how to capture that and what aspects to use.
Well, it paid off. It's an incredibly riveting part of the film.
Great. I mean, I've never done that kind of stuff. Like Mads Brugger is here. He's a genius of this stuff of like confrontational, like he's got the dirt. I don't usually have the dirt. Usually I just have like nice essay storytelling and I shed some light. All of a sudden I had like real dirt. So I don't really know how to do that. So then I had to work overtime. How do you protect it? And I was like wearing a mustache and a trench coat and all that stuff.
Tell us, you wanted to talk a little bit about Siggy Thordarson and how you got to him and why he said, he's such a complicated figure. I think you portray him with, a sharp eye, but also a sensitivity to his sort of bizarre role in all this, even if the other characters in the film don't.
You know those people who report how they ended up in a cult? Or they ended up under the thrall of some evil genius, and they really feel like they had an out-of-body experience for those like 7 years that they were torturing people for the person or drinking Kool-Aid or whatever. My several hours with Siggy are that. This guy is unbelievably seductive. I had been told by everybody, he's despicable. He's the worst person in the world. And when you get with him, I was like, my face was hurting from smiling. Because everything he says is bizarre, kind of weird and wonderful, and terrible and evil, and just evil versus evil. He's just like an unbelievable, the evil doesn't stop with him. So I said to him at one point, you're like an amazing figure. You've just confessed to me that you're a pedophile. You've confessed that you're a financial criminal, that you're a con artist, and that you joined a band of people who were really kind to you, and you ended up embezzling money out of their gift shop. You're not sorry about this? No. Well, why are you telling it to me? Why do you confess it in front of a camera? Well, it's already public record. Why would I deny it? Now, that sounded clever, but I got a feeling behind it that he enjoys it. He enjoys the getting away with murder part of it. Even being in front of my camera, figuring he's kind of still getting away with murder. By the way, there's a guy who looks just like Assange in the 6th row. Is he here just to make me nervous? Are you going to go to all my screens? I would have cast you if you were. I kept trying to find Julian lookalikes and put them on trains and stuff. But okay, so anyway, so I said to him, you're like a bizarre character, you're like a broad daylight criminal. I've never met somebody like you. So I went, and it's not in the movie, and it pains me. I said to him, if you were a Batman villain, which one would you be? My staff is like, can we go home? And I said, if you were a Batman villain, which? And he said, not the penguin.
Yeah.
Not the penguin. He didn't want to be the penguin. So I said, okay, another one? I don't really like Batman. So I said, okay, anything else? Despicable Me, he said. I got a live one here. I was like, okay, so Despicable Me. He goes, well, who? I said, well, Gru. And then it became clear what he meant was Gru's a bad guy who does one good thing in the end. And it was clear to me. I didn't know what he was going to do in the interview. I did not know he was going to disown the indictment in the interview. Mm-hmm. That's one of those amazing things. Something happens to you when you're making other plans. I was just there to vilify the guy.
And when was the interview?
Say again.
When did you do the interview with him?
My guess is Siggy was, my sense of time. I've been in this for a long time. I've been on Desert Island with this movie for years. I would think it was early 2023. You can look it up. He was arrested a week later and incarcerated. So I couldn't get any follow-up questions. I don't know what I would have asked, but I remember thinking, tracks.
Well, I just want to know what happened when he had his friend shoot him. That's the thing.
I have the footage of that. I didn't show it because...
No, you didn't need to.
Yeah, it was just it's so Siggy. I think Herzog did that, where you don't watch the thing with the bear. He doesn't let you hear the bear. And I've never known whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. I had a chat with him about it once, like, why is it for you to decide whether we get to see it? But then I did the same thing because it was more elegant.
So I know it's too late for notes on a film that's...
It's never too late for notes. This thing comes out next year.
So,
notes?
I feel like you might have let Biden off the hook a little bit easy in the plea deal. a lot of journalists feel, and a lot of, I think, press freedom watchers feel that the plea deal could have set a dangerous precedent because it allowed Assange pled guilty to the dissemination of information, not just the collecting of information, obviously not the hacking. But in the end, Biden didn't relent and they punished him, or he pled guilty for time served, 162 months, I think it was. Yeah. And as you sort of hurtle to this very emotional conclusion, I feel like there's a beat about other administrations besides Trump. And, you have Obama in the front of the film. I just wonder if you thought about that.
I had a theory about it, which is that at the end of the day, and it's very hard to get legal details across in the film, but basically, Assange pled guilty in an absurd outcome for the US government. He pled guilty to having correctly functioned as a journalist according to the First Amendment, but not being aware that the US government has an internal problem, that the Espionage Act contradicts the Constitution. I needed to get that across. The truth is the US was hell-bent on getting a felony against a journalist, and that is catastrophic. But Julian was aware that the precedent that he had had time served would not be applicable to any future journalist in America because he didn't have time served for what's in the indictment. He had time served in a British prison for a bail violation in England. It's unrelated to the US activity. And so he understood, I get out, they get their mad goal to have a felony against a journalist, which is not good, but it sheds light on the disaster of the Espionage Act, and a precedent has not been set for jailing a journalist in the United States under the Espionage Act. Instead, what they did was dismiss the case, was the language. And the dismissal was America's way of saving face, and Julian knew a 5-year sentence in a British prison for a British bail violation would not be applicable to a U.S. operative in journalism. And I think that's a brilliant move by him and his legal team. Extremely hard to explain in a movie. I found it. I couldn't get that across more than we did.
You have the line where he points out the inherent contradictions. That I think
and it's the real language. I didn't want to go, by the way, what he's really meaning is...
Turn flip back to one of his lawyers trying to make that case. I mean, you've probably followed...
You're not wrong, but I'm just telling you why in the style of it, how much people's eyes glaze over a little bit.
Yeah. Speaking of precedent, we are sort of in an unprecedented era right now with journalism at the Washington Post and across other news organizations. You've probably seen our reporters have refused to sign the new Pentagon pledge.
Very proud of all of you. Thank you.
Well, hopefully there's more to come on that, but it wasn't a hard decision. Even to be removed from, the reporting in the agency that, I think my team has 40 years collectively of reporting within the Pentagon. That document actually said, when we had drafts come back from the Pentagon, it said that the solicitation of information, even, on a web page, saying, send us tips on Signal, we want to talk to people in the Pentagon or national security establishment, could be considered the solicitation of a crime. What do you make of the legacy of WikiLeaks 15 years later and where we are today, both in terms of secrets and in terms of journalism?
I asked Julian this recently. I was connecting with him about the film, and I said, do you ever ask yourself whether your actions in combination with the retaliation of your actions have made the world worse or better? Because, there's an old reality in revolutionary activity, which is if you don't kill the beast and you just wound the beast can come back stronger and you rue the day. I asked Harry Belafonte once, before he passed away, I asked him, what do you think went wrong in terms of rights for African Americans and the progress of African Americans in terms of the civil rights movement and broader civil rights concerns? And he said, I think we dropped our guard too soon. We declared victory too soon. We didn't realize how perennial this fight is. And I think in Julian's case, I was afraid that the ricochet had been so severe that I wondered what he thought. And to his amazing credit, he said, I ask myself that every day. He didn't say, no, of course, you have to stay by the principle, the principle, the principle, the principle. And as he was so self-effacing about it, I said, I think the jury's in for me, that you have to have done what you did. And even if the temporary reality that we're living in is retaliatory and even dreadful, that's a passage we must go through to get to a more promised land. You know, Henry Kissinger once asked Chou En-lai of China. He asked him what he thought of the French Revolution. And Chou En-lai gave a fantastically Chinese answer. He said, too soon to tell. And I think that applies here. I think the work of WikiLeaks, the Promethean, the idea that there's a modern person, that a person can compare to Prometheus with a straight face, tells you he did the right thing, or the entire concept we have of the role of information for humans is flawed. So though the retaliatory waters may be very, very rough, I think we must brave them to get to, particularly in this information dystopia we're in, we have got to have public empowerment, or we are all going to be mental slaves. So better more WikiLeaks and more retaliation. More, you know, what do they want to do? They knew that the Dropbox, going after Julian, they already know that that Dropbox he invented is in every major newsroom. Everyone uses encryption now. So they're not really stopping him. What they're doing is making an example. Don't fuck with us or we'll come after your baby's diaper. Right? That's the level. This is mafia rules. Whether it was Biden, Obama, Trump, they all did it. Trump just took it into, you know, his special brand of mafia.
Is it okay if you take a question or two from the audience?
It's up to them. I'm here all night. Me and Julian. In the seventh row.
I don't know if you've taken a lot of questions from Washington. There can be opinions.
All right.
Not questions, but I will use the moderator's microphone.
Thank you all so much for watching. Really.
Thank you very much. My name is Chip Gibbons. I was in the film for about 3 seconds when Jen showed up in NBC. I remember that day. I promise it's not an opinion, but I was in London twice to cover the extradition as a journalist. I was one of the only American journalists in that courtroom when that happened. And the other one, I was with Jack from Socialist Magazine. The other ones were all independent outlets. It wasn't the Washington Post. It wasn't the New York Times. It wasn't the Wall Street Journal. Do you feel like the mainstream media missed the boat on this story? And do you think that had an impact on the case?
I think there was a love-hate relationship between mainstream news outlets and WikiLeaks from the start. They wanted the oh my God factor of what Bradley Chelsea Manning had made available to WikiLeaks. They wanted that, but they wanted a level of safety. And when they started to understand the sort of fearlessness that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were engaged in, remember, they're not on anybody's payroll. The journalist is sitting there with a job and a pension and a corporate architecture. And so they
not
wanted...
so much pensions.
Not so exactly. They were very apologetic. But the honest truth is that you've got people in the room who are institutional, and they're sitting with anarchists, effectively, a narco-information, people power people. And that was ultimately going to fracture. And when the U.S. seems to have weaponized the events that took place in Sweden, whatever those events were, they were certainly force multiplied by the Swedish government and by a collaboration with the U.S. government to become a real black cloud. It happened to Ellsberg. It happens to almost everybody that some smear campaign goes on. When that smear campaign became so effective, I think a rift that was already available between mainstream journalism and WikiLeaks grew out of proportion. If you ask David Lee, if David Lee were honest with why he made the gigantic mistake he made, it's unexplainable why the man put a password in a book. It's beyond anything I can contemplate. I can't even write it off to stupidity. It's bizarre. But the real reason it happened, he said later, I didn't know that the password was still active. Well, when you have a password protecting 250,000 cables of informants and protected people, you'd ask. Why didn't he ask? Because the whole Sweden explosion had already happened and the journalists had run for the hills. So they weren't about to say, hey, I'm trying to profit from your story, Julian. Is that password still active? So you can see how human, flawed, and unfortunate the rift was. But I also think over the years since then, prior to maybe what we're doing, WikiLeaks has really never gotten out from under the smear campaign. So journalism enterprises generally kind of wash their hands of it. Look at the flotilla. I mean, most American news outlets didn't cover the flotilla at all. You know, and on the day of the 7 million Americans marching in the No Kings rally, the New York Times didn't run a cover story on it, but did run a many, many weeks later echo of some Charlie Kirk story. So go ask them what they're doing for a living and what they're scared of. And I think we know the answer to that. But, you know, then ask them to look at what the news outlets did with the Third Reich, because we know this story and how it ends. And if they don't walk out of the Pentagon, this is a slippery slope. So maybe we're starting to see it.
Way too short. Thank you for this fabulous piece of work that you did. Thank you for honoring my second greatest example of journalistic hero. My first being Gary Webb. Those who don't know, he was the guy who blew the whistle.
We love Gary Webb.
The crack epidemic and CIA's conspiracy. Not to mention he allegedly committed suicide by shooting himself 2 times in the head. I was really disappointed and actually upset to see people that I like, you know, Jimmy Fallon, I believe, and Whoopi Goldberg. I think I heard her voice, and even Trevor Noah laughing at Julian Assange. So thank you for including that. But I was more upset about the number of people that betrayed him. And you talked about that, you know, the SIG guy, the POS guy.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about what's up with the other dude that went and exposed the password and all that, because we should be canceling this guy and making his life a pure hell. So if you can give us some information on that. And then finally, you know, who is overseeing, you know, war crimes being committed now? Because, you know, we've seen, you know, all the war crimes in apartheid Israel, the number of journalists killed there. No one's been held accountable in the issue that brought WikiLeaks to the fore here. I just want to know, like, where do we go from here? Because clearly it has gotten worse, in my opinion. If you can speak to that. Thank you.
Right. No, I love all those thoughts and questions. I mean, the first thing to say is when you see the impunity with which war crimes are now committed in broad daylight, as I was saying, mainstream, you know, you watch mainstream live-streamed war crimes now. You can see why Chelsea Manning, and then by extension WikiLeaks, thought it was so important to put those war crimes out into broad daylight, because we now have gotten to a world that is so inured to that stuff that they end up being a kind of canary in the coal mine. And I think one of the things, when you said a moment ago that we should cancel, let's say, David Lee, he's the journalist who published the password, I have the feeling that, much as I understand your anger, that is not a road to a solution. And it's not that I'm scared of holding people accountable. I've made films where I hold people accountable. I accused Henry Kissinger of being a war criminal in a movie. I have no problem with that. But I do think the systems of power that are manipulating our lives, and I think fast forwarding us to planetary destruction and to the destruction of our own species and others, they love us infighting. They love us engaging in the blood sport of canceling each other when mistakes are made. when cowardice is engaged in, when a wrong decision is made, even a malicious decision. And the reason I raise this is that David Lee is living in a culture where The Guardian is one of the best names in news at that time. So it's not like he's on the side of the devil. He's already on the side of the angels in a world where it's extremely hard. The Guardian was raising individual donations from readers because we are living in a strangled media landscape where a smaller and smaller handful of gigantic corporations that are unregulated are controlling what we consume. That's where our focus needs to be, not on the individual errors that are made in the culture of fear and insecurity that fosters. Though I believe he made a grave mistake and I believe he betrayed Julian, he also was the person you saw in the office at the beginning who was like half in tears watching the content. And there were a lot of people who wouldn't have had that feeling. So rather than fully hang him out to dry, I probably would say, what does the demise of David Lee teach us about the distorting pressures that capitalistic news organizations are putting on their extremely well-meaning career journalists? That would be a much better place for our focus. And it really gets at the Trevor Noahs and all that. They're all in a culture of entertainment where we laugh at things that one day will be looked at as this was a species that made entertainment of its own path to extinction. It's mind-blowing if you think about it from 40,000 feet.
Thank you for a marvelous film. I'm a whistleblower lawyer who spent my career representing whistleblowers, so I was fascinated by the fact, especially at a symposium like this, at a film festival, where the catalyst is to bring together investigative journalists, documentaries, filmmakers to see films, that the whistleblower, if I'm understanding your answer to the question, was really one of the germs germinated this story forward for you. Very curious about, so two-part question, very curious about the motivations of the whistleblower here, and I just also wondered if you ever saw the parallels or were familiar with the whistleblower Alex Plaza, who was a security guard in the details for the conservatorship for Britney Spears. He was working for Mr. Spears, and he came forward, and I thought there were some really uncanny parallels on what is it about being so close and personal with someone where you decide that you crossed the line. And it was so similar, right? This gentleman also said this one you saw that the security across different bedrooms and privacy violations.
Yeah.
So can you respond to sort of what
Sure.
was
I
the
mean,
motivation?
I once talked to a bunch of times, but I was having a conversation with the screenwriter and director Tony Gilroy, made the Bourne Identity movies and things like that. I think he's the maker of Andor at the moment. And Tony said to me, I'm like a fanboy. I think he's a brilliant writer. So I was asking him that question. And he said, he goes, what interests me is systems. I've always been interested in systems where, there's cracks in the walls and that the humanity leaks out the cracks, And I understood it immediately because I've always been interested in that as well. And for every system, the prison industrial complex that I made a movie about, or the military industrial complex, or the inner world of Ronald Reagan, or the war crimes accountability of Henry Kissinger, any of these topics, and I did a lot with the drug war. It was always remarkable, deeply courageous insiders who came and whispered something to me in the break that got me onto a topic I wouldn't have had access to. And that happens because systems are well conceived as if they're machines, but they're made of humans. And so they inherit all those human properties like guilt, empathy, remorse, embarrassment, shame. Everybody's got to go home and tell their spouse what they did today, and before long they tell their priest or something, and then all of a sudden there's a risk that it could get out, and then they feel guilty, and then they go through a whole range of emotions. The whistleblower in our case who spoke to us, and he was one of several, there were about 5 people who really blew whistles to us in one way or another. He's the one who's, portrayed. He just felt he had done something really wrong, and he needed the money when he did it. And, you know, it's like boiling a frog in warm water. The jobs and the requests and the commands and the instructions, they get weirder as you go. And before long, you just leave the job ultimately, but you don't really look back. You're just like, I got in, I got out, I got a paycheck. I hope I don't have to think about this again. And it was when the Spanish extortion case erupted that I don't think he was trying to cover his ass or something. I think he really just felt badly at first and then outraged when David Morales tried to cover his tracks.
And he finds his way to you in an art opening film?
No, he's a completely different figure. I only met, we were about a year and a half into the project when that emerged. We had already been making something about the torture of Julian Assange and also about, we knew about Siggy. We hadn't met with Siggy and we didn't know if we were going to meet with Siggy. Thank you.
I'll also just say that, you know, people do still come talk to journalists, whether you want to call them whistleblowers or sources. You know, what we find is that the higher the systems build a wall, the more that humanity sneaks out. People want to talk. People have problems with the way the administration deals with things. I mean, we're seeing this in the Venezuela actions now.
It's why we're sitting here ourselves. Inside each and every one of us is a person who enjoys that we're talking about this. It matters. We care. And so it's that human impulse collectively to care and to connect and to share ideas and to share concerns. That's what Snowden said. They can contain our bodies, but they can't contain our minds.
I think we'll take one more question, and then
there's two there. We'll do two. Go quick. Combine it makes the rules.
So democracy, a lot of us are very concerned about that right now, and have been for a long time. But one of the things as storytellers, as documentary filmmakers, as journalists that we have to be thinking about now in a different way is sort of how do we make sure that we're not becoming unwitting agents of foreign adversaries? And Wikileaks has absolutely been a dream come true for active measures, operators, and foreign adversaries that try to divide us. And the DNC hack was a great example of that, but there are more as well. So I guess, how do you think about active measures and the responsibility of these anonymous leak tools being misused? And how do you think about that in analysis of how you portray the overall output? And were you concerned about getting caught up in some of those active measures efforts as well?
Yeah, in the case of WikiLeaks and the DNC, I spent the better part of 2 years trying to find evidence that WikiLeaks had collaborated with Russia or something like that to hurt the DNC or to hurt Hillary Clinton. We found evidence of that only in the mouths of people from inside the DNC. We looked and looked and looked. The main thing that everybody talked about was Benghazi and Hillary's use of a private email server when I would go interview people about what WikiLeaks had done. WikiLeaks wasn't involved in us. They have nothing to do with them. WikiLeaks was only in the business of revealing the idiotic pasta recipes and, frankly, what the DNC was doing to Bernie. And I believe all Americans should know what was done to Bernie, because a huge, huge part of the American Democratic voting public loved Bernie Sanders, and it was robbed from them. And the fact that WikiLeaks that's what they came into contact with, I think that was incredibly valuable. The New York Times has said it was completely newsworthy. Everybody knows that by now, past DNC spin. So I looked and looked and couldn't find one that looked like active measure, looked like that. I did wonder all the time, how do you know what you're getting? And I think at the end of the day, Dean Baquet at the New York Times kind of said it best in an interview we had with him that we didn't use in the film. But Dean said, very often you get correct information from an unfortunate source, but the information prevails. And you don't hold against the public's right to know the information, the darkness of the source, and you don't even hold against it the darkness of the motivation that might be served overseas or whatever, because we're not first and foremost patriots. We're first and foremost humans committed to truth. Anything else is a recipe for war. So I have to be in the truth business, even if somebody's rubbing their hands in glee in a foreign country, then let's clean up what we're doing. They won't be able to rub their hands in glee if we're not internally divided because we don't believe in an immoral country. So you got people arguing over the morality of America. Let's solve that and figure out just how secret we're supposed to be, just how much we're supposed to classify. There's this phenomenon of overclassification. That's a far bigger threat to the American people than people rubbing their hands in a foreign country at our dissension. So did I know that we would add dissension if we did this in a truth-telling way? Yes, but again, those are those rough waters I think we have to get through. I am aware we may drown in those rough waters, but then we were going to drown anyway.
I'll just add quickly, I think part of this issue of provenance that you bring up is why when Wikileaks burst onto the scene, it was so compelling and also so problematic for mainstream journalists. As you say, yes, we are not patriots first. We are objective. We're truth tellers, and I think most media organizations hold themselves to that. But Assange was different because it didn't play by American journalism rules. He didn't play by British journalism rules. He was a global citizen that, as we see in the film, was moving around. And it was this radical notion of transparency in publishing these things that, when we get classified documents at the Washington Post, and I'm sure at the Times and other places, we really seek to prove provenance, to find out where they're coming from, because those things matter in a different way. And I think there was something fundamental, and still is, in his sort of ethos of publishing that is sort of
he had a learning curve. I can see that the later Julian, you can see in the footage, you can see that he got schooled by the way the Afghan warlogs came out. I think at the end of the Afghan warlogs release, his connections with mainstream journalists caused him to be far more redaction-oriented going forward. And some of them said at that point he became more redaction-oriented than some of them were, because WikiLeaks' entire brand was hanging in the balance. And so he became vigilantly committed to it, where initially he was a computer guy. He hadn't really thought that deep into what you do. Then he started learning it from the people on the fly, but by then he was already the bad boy in the equation. So I don't think he ever came out from under that.
Last question.
Jen.
So I was very curious about how all the people portrayed in the film responded to the film. Have they seen it? Or what?
A good number of them have seen it. Some of them came to the Cannes film festival premiere when we were there. Others have seen it in one way or another, where I make sure, particularly if somebody might have a concern or whatever, we make sure that we're independent. I won't change something that somebody wants me to change for a stylistic reason, or because they don't like what they say in some way or something. But if they have a legal concern, we were given a battery of legal and other considerations over time. The film comports with those reactions and is careful about those, really to protect the innocent and protect sources or protect lines of understanding that could impeach other legal matters. But basically, I would say of the main body of people in the film, I would say probably half have seen it, and the next half will see it over the next couple of months. But again, I know from the way they interviewed, I'm not going to put something in a movie that somebody didn't want to say, or I'm not going to put it in a bad light. The strangest one of them all was that Sarah Harrison, who cries at the end of the film, didn't like that. And I said, what do you want me to do? I mean, it's unbelievably beautiful what you say. And she just kept saying, you're making me look like I'm kind of all bent out of shape about this or whatever. And I said, well, I am. Like, I think it's right that you be and all that. And she had a concern about it, and I adjusted it to meet her halfway because I wanted it in the film so badly. But it's such a big moment. It's an emotional moment. I didn't want her to be uncomfortable with it. And I think she's semi-comfortable now with it. And I'm comfortable. Semi. I liked it a little better the other way, but it's in the middle, and I'm happy. And I think that's the right outcome. I think if you leave disgruntled souls, that you've done something with your movie that has its own collateral damage. I don't think that's right.
Thank you all for sticking around for this film.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations on a really powerful film.
Yes, I just want to say thank you for bringing this remarkable film to double exposure. We are so honored to have been the U.S. premiere for this film. Thank you so much. And please join us at the Orfalea. Stop by, have a drink, and say hello.